Is this abandoned insane asylum haunted? Or are these terrifying images simply the work of urban explorers messing around? What happens inside the Greystone Hills Sanatorium? It all started in the fall of 2019 when three friends, Daniel Myers, a documentary filmmaker, his childhood friend Claire, and their mutual friend Jamal, set out to explore the abandoned sanatorium. But this was no ordinary trip. They were exploring one of the scariest abandoned buildings in the United States, a place known locally as the Devil's Hospital. The massive brick compound was built in the early 1900s and closed in 1972, after a series of strange incidents. Reports surfaced of doctors performing unethical experiments and abusing their patients. People whispered that the place was haunted and that those who entered never came out the same. All three of them had heard the rumors. When they arrived at the site, the building was shrouded in mist and silence, a hush that seemed to swallow all sound. The place looked straight out of a horror movie, just like they'd hoped. It was exactly what Daniel was looking for, a building with stories that needed to be told. But what he didn't know was that some stories are best left untold. Daniel's team filmed everywhere: the overgrown gardens, the deserted dining hall, the empty classrooms, and the crumbling chapel. There was an eerie stillness everywhere, a heavy silence that seemed to press down on them. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, they continued their exploration. The air grew colder as they descended into the depths of the building. They found a storage room filled with old medical equipment, rusty wheelchairs, and examination tables covered in grime. It felt like stepping back in time, but they soon realized that they were not alone. As darkness fell, strange sounds began to echo through the corridors. The wind whispered through broken windows, whistling a tune that sounded like a mournful lullaby. Then there were footsteps, slow and deliberate, following them from room to room. Some of the places they visited, like the old nursery, were particularly haunting. Daniel could feel the ghosts of children at play around him, toys that had long turned to dust scratching at his ankles, their laughter echoing faintly in his ears. By the time they reached the chapel, they were shaken. But Daniel pressed on. He wanted to capture as much as he could, even if it meant facing the unknown head-on. In the chapel, they discovered a weathered Bible lying open on a pew, its pages filled with strange markings and symbols. It was as if someone had tried to communicate with them from beyond the grave. Some of the drawings were disturbing, images of tormented souls and eyes peering blindly out from behind bars. Suddenly, Claire noticed a faint scratching sound coming from above. They looked up to see a bat fluttering around in the rafters, its wings beating frantically. It swooped low, almost grazing Daniel's head before disappearing into the shadows. Claire, who had always been skeptical, couldn't help but shiver. Daniel, ever the pragmatist, suggested that it was probably just a bird, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, seeping through the cracks in the walls and slithering down their spines. Daniel remembered the old caretaker's warning. He had spoken to a local historian who had mentioned a caretaker who lived on the grounds. When asked what it was like working there, he had said, "It's not just a job, it's a way of life. You feel the sadness in the walls, hear the echoes in the halls. You can't escape it. It follows you home." Now, surrounded by the oppressive darkness, Daniel wondered if the caretaker had been right. Was this place more than just an abandoned sanatorium? By midnight, the atmosphere had grown so heavy that Daniel and his friends decided to call it quits. They packed up their equipment, their hands shaking slightly, and prepared to leave. As they walked through the main entrance, they felt a sudden drop in temperature. It was as if a cold hand had been gripping their hearts. The door slammed shut behind them with a resounding boom, making them jump. They could hear the scratching sound again. They turned to see that the door had swung open on its own, revealing a pitch-black hallway. They fled into the night, racing through the darkness, the sound of their own breathing echoing in their ears. As they stumbled through the undergrowth, they could hear the whispers growing louder, taunting them, urging them to stay. Just as they thought they had escaped, they heard a blood-curdling scream pierce the night. It was Claire's voice. They froze, their hearts pounding. They knew they had to turn back, but fear kept them rooted to the spot. In the morning light, they returned to the asylum, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. But they found Claire, sitting calmly on the steps leading up to the main entrance. When they asked her what had happened, she looked at them as if she had never seen them before. Her eyes were blank, her expression vacant. Then she began to speak in a voice that was not her own. "Why did you bring me here?" she whispered, her voice raspy and weak. "I don't want to stay here." They helped her to her feet, their minds reeling. How could this be happening? Had Claire been possessed by the spirit of the asylum? Or was something more sinister at play? As they tried to lead her away from the building, the voices grew louder, scratching and clawing at their sanity. The asylum was not letting go of one of its own. They struggled to keep Claire with them, but it was like trying to hold on to a wisp of smoke. Suddenly, she broke free from their grasp and turned to face them. Her eyes blazing with an otherworldly light, she whispered, "Don't follow me." Then she disappeared into the shadows of the asylum, leaving them alone in the growing darkness. They raced through the labyrinthine halls, desperately searching for Claire. They found her in the chapel. She was kneeling before the altar, her head bowed. When they called out to her, she didn't respond. It was as if she were a part of the very walls. They approached cautiously, not knowing what to expect. But as they drew closer, they saw that she was crying. Relief washed over them, but it was short-lived. As they reached out to comfort her, she looked up, her eyes filled with terror. "Help me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't get out." Just then, the scratching sound filled the air. They turned to see a gaping hole in the wall, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. The presence of the building seemed to intensify, pressing against them, suffocating them with its sorrow. With Claire in tow, they cautiously descended the stairs. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker. They found themselves in a subterranean labyrinth, a place that seemed to exist outside of time. The air hung heavy with the stench of decay and despair, a constant reminder of the suffering that had occurred here. The walls were adorned with cryptic symbols and disturbing drawings, some depicting grotesque figures with elongated limbs and vacant eyes. Others showed people trapped in cages or drowning in pools of darkness. It was as if the spirits of the asylum's former patients were trying to communicate with them, desperate to share their torment. They continued their descent, guided by a faint flickering light at the end of the tunnel. As they approached, they saw that it led to a heavy steel door emblazoned with a skull and crossbones. Beside it, a sign read, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." Terror gripped them, but curiosity burned brighter. Daniel placed his hand on the doorknob, his fingers trembling. What they found on the other side was beyond anything they could have imagined. Before them lay a vast chamber illuminated by an eerie green glow. In the center stood a large metal table surrounded by chairs, and on the wall opposite them was a single mirror. Daniel felt a pull toward the mirror, an urge to see what lay on the other side. As he approached, the green glow intensified, filling his vision. When he finally looked up, he gasped. The image staring back at him was not his own. It was that of a gaunt, emaciated man with hollow eyes and skin stretched tight over his bones. The man in the mirror gestured toward Daniel, his finger long and skeletal. Then he vanished. Daniel stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The sound echoed in the chamber, bouncing off the cold, hard walls. In the distance, he could hear Claire's voice calling his name. But the asylum was a tomb, swallowing all sound. There was no escape. He ran, stumbling over his own feet, desperate to find Claire and flee the asylum's clutches. But it was too late. The asylum had claimed them, trapping them in its endless labyrinth of pain and despair. As the darkness closed in around him, Daniel understood. This was not just an abandoned sanatorium. It was a gateway to another world, A world of shadows and madness where the rules of reality were twisted and the dead refused to rest. They were not safe. Not anymore. And as the screams echoed through the halls, he knew that their story would become another chapter in the asylum's dark history, a tale whispered in hushed tones around campfires, a warning to those who dared to venture too close to the Devil's Hospital. The abandoned sanatorium stood silent once more, its secrets buried deep within its decaying walls. But those who ventured too close could still hear the whispers, feel the cold touch of despair, and see the shadows dancing in the corners of their eyes, a reminder that some places are best left undisturbed.